Larry, so we are now in back of the dam, and that would have been the Narrows, or is the Narrows, where they put the dam, and that's where the soldiers were attacked?
That's where the Apaches attacked them, and of course they couldn't go on through, so they had to retreat with the mule that had the gun and work their way back over here. You can see Weaver's Needle off over in the distance. That is not the dominant pointed peak that the lieutenant was talking about in his report.
Well, we'll get a shot of that, but to show the distance here, but Weaver's Needle here, and then you've got the Superstition Mountain proper right there. We're behind it. So it kind of gives you an idea just how far away we actually are from the area where most people talk about. All right, we've got this peak right in front of us here, Larry. What is that?
Well, this is what I believe is the dominant pointed peak that was in the officer's report that he made up on where he buried the guns. You could actually say that Bayous Butte here was a pointed peak, but from the south, that is really pointed. And I think that's what they were referring to. Now, they would have been over in the Wash, which starting over here where we were pretty close, curves away and then comes back out up here. And that's where they would have hidden the guns. And then they went on north because back down the canyon, the Apaches could have certainly ambushed them again. They couldn't go back south. And they knew that the Salt River was to the north, and they knew that Fort McDowell was to the west. And you get up here about a mile or so, and there's a valley where the JF Ranch line cabin is. The Forest Service is using it today because there's no cattle grazing out here anymore. And there was a natural trail that went up a canyon to the left side of the valley, and you either dropped dramatically down into Angel Springs, or you crossed over the top of the ridge to Tortilla Ranch. And that's where they would have come out to at the Salt River. And the two of them made it to the crossing, which would be down where the Red Mountain Diversion Dam is, in that area. And the Apaches were waiting for them. They knew where they were going to come out. They didn't bother chasing them all across there. They just went around and waited for them. And they killed the enlisted man.
Yeah.
So the lieutenant was the only guy left to make the report. And I really don't believe that the lieutenant was from Fort McDowell. There's a list of officers in a book called The Last Bugle Call. He's not, you know, I don't think he's listed in there. And so the packer would have been the one that knew where to take him. He was a civilian, and he was probably been to Fort McDowell and was probably waiting for him at Camp Pinnell. But he was killed right away. So these guys were out here in an area they'd never been exposed to. And they brought him back over here to find the guns, and he couldn't come anywhere near finding it. He just was completely lost. So those guns are more than likely just over this little hill here, buried in a small cave.
Over this way, too.
Over this way.
We've got Bayous Butte right here. And then you were talking about just down here below it, there's a mine that, and there's a lot, I don't know if you can get that, Dave, or not, but the thick brush right there where I'm pointing, of course there's a lot of thick brush, but right up there against the mountain, back behind there, you say that's where a mine is?
Right at the top of that brush, on the right side of that yellow area where that pillar is, down low here. And you go around and follow the hill downward, and then you shoot back up where that heavy brush is, partly in the shadows. At the top of that is a flat area, and that's where this pit was that Hart Mullins took my father and I in 1958, and this is the very first time I heard about the Lost Dutchman legend. And he was pointing out the 3 red hills, and as we came up the canyon, we saw pinnacles that looked like a part of one of the maps in the Superstitions. I'm not saying he's right.
Right.
I'm just telling you what he
There's a lot
believed.
of places where if you squint and blink a little bit, you can say that's the area. But there are a lot of the pinpoints here. Is this where you found the wheelbarrow?
Yes. Whoever dug that pit had spent a lot of time building a pathway up on the side of the mountain. It was narrow and it was straight down on one side. And while they were, after the story he told, I was running all over the place looking at various things. And I got down there in that brush and there was this old wheelbarrow and it had an iron wheel. The sides were not as sloped as we normally think, but they weren't straight up either. But the bottom had been a separate piece. And they had folded over a little bit on the bottom all the way around the wheelbarrow. And you could easily tell, you could see the hammer marks where they had heated it and hammered this thing together like on a forge. And Hart and his brother were absolutely convinced it was a Mexican wheelbarrow. I mean, you didn't buy this at
right,
at Walmart, you know. And I just thought to myself, well, would they haul that all the way from Mexico on the back of a burro, you know, or a mule or whatever? And but there was no other explanation because you didn't make it here.
I guess you do what you have to do back then.
And they said bring it up, and it took me about a half an hour to get back up to the where they were.
And we're heading up there right now, aren't we?
And they just swore it was a Mexican wheelbarrow. And my dad took it home and put it in his yard for yard art. And he died in '66 and it disappeared real quick.
So somebody out there has that wheelbarrow.
That's right.
And you also mentioned the 3 red hills over here. And of course, one of the descriptions the Dutchman talks about is if you go past the 3 red hills, you've gone too far.
Gone too far.
And so we've got the 3 red hills over here. And then I pointed out an area just south of us, on going back, we'll see it, where has some distinct likeness to Peralta stone drawings. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the priest that's on the Peralta stone, there's a distinct marking like that over here, a formation rather. But there's formations like that all over.
Right.
Even in front of the mountain itself,
yes.
There's one. So, you know, don't know if you can go by that, but it's like, there are several areas that you can say, well, that's just like the descriptions.
Yep.
So he may have just been putting us all on, but nevertheless, you've got peaks all over here. And of course, that's one of the things that they describe is there's a peak. Didn't say it's Weaver's Needle, but that's what because it being so dominant, people think that's the area. But there's a lot of places that you could look, and there's mines or prospects laced all through here.
Yes, there is, particularly up by Iron Mountain. But the old gentleman himself that had all the documents and stuff that my friend had run across and was explaining the story of the lost pistols, he even thought Weaver's Needle was it. Well, we're so many, the Narrows, where the dam is where they were attacked. We're probably right now 10 miles from Weaver's Needle.
Oh, at least, yeah.
And they were attacked here. They weren't attacked over. They didn't take a canyon across there.
It doesn't make much sense that you'd be taking a canyon through there.
No.
That would be sheer suicide, actually. I would
Well, with the Apaches on the warpath, that few of soldiers was just an open invitation.
Something like this makes more sense. And like I said, there's your 3 red hills, there's your peaks, and there's a prospect back there, and who knows what there is back in here. You just never know what's back in this way. And of course, Rogers Trough is just over this way a little bit. Just such an amazing area to explore. So many mysteries here. I call this Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.